The fierce clashes between the Russian army and the Ukrainian armed forces continue intensely as it enters the 11th day within the borders of Ukraine. The pace of Russian troops had slowed as the weekend entered. The Ukrainian General Staff declared all-out defense and resistance on Friday and called for resistance, including civilians, across the country. The admirable resistance of the Ukrainian armed forces finds its place in a historical scene. With its increasing strength, the Russian army blockaded many city centers of the country and continues to organize airstrikes. Today, the historical success of the Ukrainian Air Force and air defense units has left its mark on the agenda. According to reports from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense and open-source research centers on social media, the Russian Air Force suffered a massive defeat and lost more than a dozen warplanes. Let's examine the Russian Air Force's terrible day over Ukraine today, in all its stunning details. Today, the real conflict between the Ukrainian armed forces and the Russian army is taking place in the sky. In the bombardments that have been going on since the beginning of the war, the Ukrainian city centers are in ruins, while at the same time, Russia is inflicting serious losses. The Russian Air Force has had a terrible power over Ukraine today. Russia seems to have lost dozens of fighter jets, helicopters and a drone in the past few days. According to the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, more than 40 Russian fighter jets and more than 40 attack helicopters were destroyed. 10 days later, it is clear that the Ukrainian skies are highly contentious and there has been a notable increase in reported Russian aircraft losses in recent days. In general, Ukrainian forces, as well as average civilians, continue to resist the occupying forces, and the Kremlin is increasingly besieging large population centers. While it is difficult to independently verify any type, personnel or material loss on either side of Russia's war in Ukraine, it is quite clear that the Russian military has lost a large number of fighter jets, helicopters and at least one small drone since yesterday. According to the claims of Ukraine's Ministry of Defense today, as well as open-source research centers on social media and posts by local residents, 1 Su-30SM flanker, 2 Su-34 fullbacks, 2 Su-25 frogfoots, 2 Mi-24, Mi-35 Hind and 2 Mi. It is alleged that 8 helicopters and an Orlan unmanned aerial vehicle were shot down by the US-made Stinger used by Ukrainian troops, existing air defense system complexes and Ukrainian jets. Of course, there may be more, and they are above the already reported fixed losses. Even if these figures are somewhat lacking in one way or another, it is clear that Russia is rapidly throwing its air combat force over Ukraine. Various videos and pictures of these gun attacks reported on social media have surfaced online. There are unconfirmed reports that one of the pilots of one of the downed Su-34s was a person with combat experience from the conflict in Syria. It's not clear how Ukrainian forces shot down these planes each time, but shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles, also known as man-portable air defense systems, MANPADS, appear to be a major factor. A video seen below is currently circulating the internet, showing one of these weapons hitting one of the recently shot-down Hind attack helicopters. Former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko also recorded a video today with a Ukrainian soldier named Albert, who reportedly shot down the Su-30SM with Igla series MANPADS. MANPADS, including US-made Stingers, have been important components of recent shipments of weapons and other supplies to Ukraine. According to the New York Times, a total of 14 cargo planes loaded with military aid from various countries landed on the border with Ukraine on Friday. MANPADS were also seen in the hands of Ukrainian troops providing cover for today's evacuations from the city of Irpin, just west of Kiev. During negotiations earlier this week, Russia agreed to allow safe passage of civilians from Irpin as well as Volnovakha and the port city of Mariupol, both in the southeastern part of the country. Ukrainian officials have accused Russia of failing to fulfill the planned ceasefires, which led to the complete collapse of the evacuation from Mariupol. Russian bombardment also reportedly cut a rail line out of Irpin, forcing many to flee on foot instead of by train as planned. The Kremlin, on the other hand, claimed that Ukrainian authorities in Mariupol had prevented civilians from leaving, and accused them of holding civilians hostage, ostensibly without evidence, to use the city as human shields against the continued Russian bombardment of the city. British authorities have already considered this to be nothing more than an attempt to divert criticism from its indiscriminate attacks in Ukraine, which has led to increased civilian deaths. Clashes continue across Ukraine. Last week's negotiations did not produce any plans for a more general ceasefire. Also, in cities occupied by Russian forces in the south, such as Kherson and Melitopol, protests and other reports of civil disobedience continue, despite possibly violent repression. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett reportedly met with Putin in Moscow over the conflict in Ukraine. There are reports that Ukrainian authorities have asked Bennett to act as a mediator. Earlier in the day, Putin had a televised meeting with flight attendants from the country's airlines and is now facing massive international sanctions. The Russian president said that these sanctions against Russia and others constitute a declaration of war. During his remarks, he added that there are currently no plans to declare martial law in Russia and that he would consider any country or international organization such as NATO that enforces a no-fly zone over Ukraine as a party to the conflict. Yesterday, NATO officially rejected the application of a no-fly zone over Ukraine, despite repeated calls from the Ukrainian authorities. Putin also used this opportunity to reiterate the completely unfounded claim that Ukraine is trying to develop nuclear weapons. This is one of the Kremlin's arguments for why the invasion was necessary. The ceasefire declared by Russia was intended to allow civilians to leave Mariupol and Volnovakha on Saturday, but evacuations were halted after Ukrainian officials said the shelling was renewed. Kyiv, on the other hand, is plunged into complete chaos. Sirens sounded again in Kiev tonight, and Ukraine made a statement asking the people in Kiev to enter the shelters and stay in the shelter all night. In one critical development, he developed about Turkey's Istanbul and Dardanelles Straits. A senior U.S. official said in a statement that in the event that Russia passes through the straits, if Turkey requests support, the USS Harry S. Truman aircraft carrier will be dispatched to the region to support Turkey. Turkey applies the Montreux Convention to prevent Russian warships from passing through the straits, but there does not seem to be a situation that could prevent Russia from shipping ships to its own ports. Meanwhile, Russian Defense Ministry spokesperson Igor Konashenkov said on Saturday that the Russian armed forces destroyed a total of 2,119 targets belonging to Ukraine's military infrastructure during the special operation. During the operation, a total of 2,119 targets belonging to Ukraine's military infrastructure were hit. These include 74 command points and communication points of the Ukrainian armed forces, and 108 air defense missile systems of S-300, Buk M1 and OSA. 68 radars. Station, he said. Konashenkov added that 69 land, 21 air, 748 tanks and other armored combat vehicles, 76 multi-purpose rocket launchers, 274 field artillery and mortars, 532 special military vehicles and 59 unmanned aerial vehicles were destroyed. In explaining the emerging developments, the Russian Ministry of Defense said that Russian troops did not target Ukrainian cities, but were limited to surgically striking and neutralizing Ukrainian military infrastructure. He stated that there was no threat to the civilian population. In addition, Russian Defense Ministry spokesman Igor Konashenkov told the media on Saturday that the Russian army destroyed a Ukrainian Air Force Mi-8 helicopter and 4 Sukhoi 27 jets and a Bayraktar TB2 drone on March 5. Today there were new attacks on Ukrainian military infrastructure. On March 5 alone, Russian forces destroyed 5 radars and 2 air defense missile systems Buk M1. In an air conflict near Zhytomyr, 4 Ukrainian Sukhoi 27 jets were shot down. Air defense system He shot down a Sukhoi 25 aircraft near Nezhin, and the air defense forces destroyed a Ukrainian Mi-8 helicopter and a Bayraktar TB2 drone.